In this video, I will do the answer to the chapter 11, slide 9 question. So you have the question here. Um, Obviously, it's an extremely long question, but what I want to highlight here is that you actually, we don't have to redo all of this because the previous three videos were about solving part of this question. Now, obviously, in an exam, you might get a question that is this long, that has this many steps. But obviously, if you do get a question like this, it would be worth a lot of points. It wouldn't just be worth like 4 points. It would be worth a lot of different points. And usually, I try to make sure that I carry over your mistakes. So if you make a mistake, I don't penalize you if you keep carrying it over. Okay. If you ever do get questions like this, long questions like this, make sure to show your work, do your work on a piece of paper and submit that because I will grade that work. Okay, so this being said, right, if you read correctly, these first three lines all the way up to here, right, so from the beginning of the question up here, all the way to here, and this, that's basically the information we had in the first question from this chapter. If you go back 3 videos previous to this one, we already solved that. That's the information in order to find KD. Okay. The next information, this information from here all the way to here, that's the information we had in order to calculate KPE, the required return on preferred equity. Finally, the information we have here all the way to here, that's the information we had in the previous video, the question we had in the previous video that allowed us to solve for KCE. And all of these numbers are exactly the same. So I'm not going to recalculate these numbers because go 3 videos ago, 2 videos ago, 1 video ago, and I showcase how we can calculate these numbers independently. Okay, so we already calculated these numbers. There's no point in me redoing it. Just go rewatch the appropriate video if you need it. The question is about calculating the WACC, the weighted average cost of capital. The weighted average cost of capital is simply I take the weight that the debt represent in my capital structure. So I take the market value of my debt and I divide it by the market value of the firm. So I divide it by the sum of the market value of my debt, my preferred equity, and my common equity, and I multiply this by the required return that I need to pay my investor who owns debt in the firm. Then I do the same thing, but for preferred equity instead of debt. So I find the market value of my preferred equity divided by the market value of the firm, and I multiply this by the required return that my investors in preferred equity want to get. And then I also need to do this for the common equity of the firm. So I take the market value of the common equity divided by the market value of the firm, and I multiply this by the required return on the common equity of the firm. Now, if you'll notice earlier, I did talk a little bit about using your store function and your recall function in your calculator. So when I did the first 3 questions, I actually stored the answer. So KD was 5.78%. I stored it here in my calculator under 7. So if I just do recall 7, it brings that number back up. For the KPE, the required return on preferred equity, I stored it under 8. That was 7.86. For the required return on common equity, I saved that under 9. So if I do recall 9, I'll get this number back again, and I get 11.59. Okay, so since we already have these numbers, I'm not recalculating it. We just need to find D, PE, and CE, and we're ready to go. And that actually should be relatively straightforward, I hope. The firm has 1 million bonds, and each of these bonds are worth $987. Okay, so what's the market value of the firm's debt? It's pretty straightforward. It's $1 million time 987.92, the price of each bond. And that gives us the market value of the firm's debt. So I have a million, I multiply that by 987.92, and that gives me the market value of the firm's debt. Obviously, I need this D many places in my equation. So what I'm going to do, remember, my required return on debt is saved under 7. So what I'll do is I'll save that number under 4. So everything that's linked to that debt, to my debt in the capital structure will be 7 and 4. Okay, so that's 987,920,000, and I stored this under 4. You don't need to do this, but it's just as a reminder for myself. Now we can find the market value of the preferred equity of the firm. The questions state that there are 7.5 million shares of preferred equity outstanding, and each share is worth 12.72. So I can just put that in my calculator, 7,500,000. I know not all the students know this, but I put 1 0 too many here. Instead of like erasing everything, I can just use the arrow back to remove that 0, right? And I want to multiply this by 12.72, and I get the market value of the preferred equity of this firm, which is $95,400,000. And I will store this under 5 because 8 at my required return on preferred equity. So I like to have my um, market value of my preferred equity pretty nearby. So I'll store this under 5. And finally, we have to calculate the market value of the common equity. The market value of the common equity, well, there are 10 million shares outstanding, and each one of those shares is worth $67.29. So that's going to be the answer, 67.29 times 10 million shares, I believe. And that gives us 672,900,000. And I see here some of you might have just said like, "Hey, Francis, I know like what 10 million times 67 is." Yes, I agree. I just like to have all these numbers on my calculator because I find that this is going to help me a little bit later on. Now notice, in my calculator, I need this number, like in the equation here, right? I need KD, D, KPE, PE, KCE, CE. All these numbers are now stored under 789,456 in my calculator. There is one other number that I need many times that I don't want to have to calculate all the time on my calculator. It's the market value of the firm, the sum of D plus PE plus CE. That's just the sum of these three numbers here. So let's just calculate that. It's 672 million, this number, plus whatever we put under 5, 95,400,000, plus whatever we put under 4, 987 million. Okay, and the sum of the value of this firm is 1,756,220,000. Okay, so that's the value of the firm, and that's what's going to go in here. Okay, so now that we have that, I'll just store this, by the way. I'll store this under 0 in this case. Okay. Okay, now that we have that, we can just calculate the WACC. And that should be, again, this is important. In the exam, you can submit your work. I recommend submitting your work because if you submit your work and I see that you did everything right here, right, all of your steps are correct, but let's say this number here is wrong, the 95 million, I will most likely give you 4 out of 4 as long as you're doing the right thing, but you just made a mistake, a typo in using your calculator, right? If you're doing the wrong thing, I can take all of your points away, but please submit work, show me what you did. You can get some partial points for that. Okay, so in order to calculate the WACC, I'm going to take the market value of my debt, and I'll just write it at 987 0.92 here just because I don't want to have to write all of these zeros. I divide it by the market value of my debt divided by the market value of the firm times the rate of return on debt that investors want to get, right? Or actually, in this case, it's not exactly the same thing. The yield would be the rate of return that investor wants to get, but in this case, this is the yield times 1 minus TC because it costs the firm less than what the investor wants to get because of the tax shield. I talked about that in the appropriate video. Then I'll put the market value of the preferred shares here divided by the market value of the firm. And then I'm going to multiply this by the rate of return that I need to pay for my preferred equity. And these are obviously percentage. Doesn't really matter if you don't put them, but. And then finally, I'm going to add to that the market value of my common equity. And I'm going to divide that by the market value of the firm. And I'm going to multiply that by the, whoops, not K in this case, I'm replacing the variable by numbers, by 11.59, the required return that my common shareholders want to get. Okay. And if I do all of that, I can just calculate it. And if I'm not mistaken, the answer should be 8.12, but let's just do it to make sure. Okay. So I want to take this number, which is this number here. I want to divide it by the market value of my firm, and I want to multiply it by the required return on the debt of the company. So I just hit equal right now, and I'm going to store this. This is all of this here. I'm going to store this under 1. Then I'm going to do the second term here. I want to take the market value of the preferred equity, which is this number. I want to divide it by the market value of the firm. I want to multiply this by the required return on the preferred equity of the firm. I'm just going to store this as 2. That's this number here. And then I'm trying to find a third term. So it's going to be the market value of the common equity that I divide by the market value of the firm, that I multiply by the required return on the common equity of the firm. And that is this third term here. I'm going to store that as 3. Now I can just take this number, what we had for the third term, plus what we had, whoops. I just get to take this term here, which is what we had for the third term, and add that to what we had for the second term, and add that to what we had for the first term. So I took all these 3 things, I added them together, and we get 8.12%, which is the answer. So this firm, as a weighted average cost of capital, on average, right, whenever it raised $1, some of that money will come from debt, some of that money will come from preferred shares, some of that money will come from common shares. But on average, it will have to pay 8.12% in return to these owners of capital in order to raise that $1 of fund. Okay, and this is how we calculate the weighted average cost of capital.